She surely went through phases of desperate behavior and profound loneliness, as wherever she went, someone was always following her with a camera. Elton John, a man of immense talent, compassion, and frequent controversy, was more than just an acquaintance to Princess Diana. Their friendship captivated the world but ultimately fell apart in a sudden and mysterious end. For years, the true cause of their rift remained unknown. But now, in an unexpected twist, Elton John is breaking his silence to reveal a startling truth. King Charles played a key role in the breakdown of this iconic friendship, far more than just a misunderstanding or a twist of fate. What made Diana distance herself from Elton? How did Charles influence her decisions? And why has Elton decided to speak out after decades of silence? Let's dive into this extraordinary story, piece by piece, to uncover Elton John's shocking revelation and the untold story of Princess Diana. When Elton John speaks, the world listens. His words resonate not only because he's one of the world's most beloved artists, but also because he's a man who has lived many lives, both in the spotlight and in private. Despite his fame and openness, some stories have stayed buried deep within him, like his friendship with Princess Diana, until now. In an emotionally charged interview, Elton has finally broken his long silence about the reasons behind their fallout, revealing a truth that no one saw coming. According to him, it wasn't just a misunderstanding that drove them apart, but rather a third party's influence, none other than King Charles, that played a decisive role in their separation. This revelation shocked Elton's fans, royal observers, and anyone who followed Diana's life closely. The notion that Charles, who was publicly distant from Diana for so long, could have influenced her personal relationships so profoundly adds a new layer of complexity to an already intricate narrative. Elton's decision to speak out after so many years was not made lightly. He understood the impact of his words and the shockwaves they would cause. But, as he explained, the time had finally come to share the truth. To understand the depth of Elton's revelation, we need to go back to the beginning of his friendship with Diana, a bond that formed quite unexpectedly. It was a summer evening in 1981 at Prince Andrew's 21st birthday party. Elton, already an international superstar, was there to perform, while Diana had just embraced her role as the new Princess of Wales, fresh from her fairy tale wedding to Prince Charles. As the night progressed, the ballroom stayed surprisingly empty. A strange scene for an event of such stature, but it would allow something magical to happen. Diana, always seeking an escape from royal expectations, found herself alone in the ballroom with Elton. A band was playing a lively Charleston, and in a moment of spontaneity, Diana invited Elton to dance. The scene could have been pulled from a movie. Two public figures from completely different worlds, united on an empty dance floor. They laughed, twirled, and, for an instant, forgot their roles as princess and pop star. What could have been a fleeting moment turned into a deep, lasting friendship. As Diana's marriage with Charles deteriorated, her bond with Elton grew stronger. By the mid-1980s, cracks in Diana's seemingly perfect royal life began to show. Behind the fairy tale image, her marriage with Charles was unraveling, and the pressures of royal duties weighed heavily on her mental health. This was a period marked by her struggles with bulimia, self-doubt, and feelings of isolation, though much of it remained hidden from the public. For Elton, who had fought his own battles, Diana's struggles struck a chord. He became more than a friend, a confidant to whom she turned when the walls of Buckingham Palace felt suffocating. Diana confided her deepest fears and frustrations, often centering on her strained marriage with Charles. As Diana's relationship with Charles fell apart, something even more unsettling was happening behind the scenes. For years, Elton had assumed that the distance between them was due to Diana's personal challenges. But in his recent revelations, Elton unveiled a darker truth. Charles had been pulling strings behind the scenes. Charles, always focused on the royal family's image, saw Diana's growing popularity as a threat. Her humanitarian work, her openness with the public, and her ability to connect with people made her the most beloved royal figure, often overshadowing Charles himself. As her influence grew, so did his efforts to control the narrative, including her friendships. Elton has now revealed that Charles, wary of Diana's relationships with prominent figures outside the family, took active steps to distance them. As the royal establishment exerted increasing control over Diana's personal choices, her relationships were strained under this pressure. Charles, particularly uneasy with Elton's flamboyant personality and his involvement in causes deemed controversial at the time, like his AIDS Foundation, viewed this friendship as a potential risk. The royal family, conservative in its values, was hesitant to associate with such causes, and Charles feared that Diana's closeness with Elton might invite negative criticism of the institution. Thus, Charles subtly pressured Diana to distance herself from Elton. Without ever demanding an outright breakup, the message was clear. This friendship posed a risk, and it would be better if she stepped back. Torn between her loyalty to Elton and her desire to maintain harmony within the royal family, Diana began to feel the weight of this influence. Charles's discreet pressure ultimately drove a wedge between Diana and Elton, a rift that neither of them fully understood at the time, but one that left lasting scars. The breaking point in the relationship between Elton and Diana came in 1997, just a few months before her tragic death. At the time, Elton was working on a photo book to be sold for charity in support of his AIDS Foundation, a cause that was especially close to his heart, especially in a period when the AIDS epidemic was still heavily stigmatized. The book was meant to include photos of prominent personalities, and Diana, as a committed humanitarian, had initially agreed to write the foreword. This was a pivotal moment for Elton. Diana's participation would draw attention to the cause and help destigmatize conversations around AIDS, a subject that very few public figures, and even fewer members of the royal family, dared to address. Diana's support meant the world to Elton, and he was thrilled to have her involved in the project. But suddenly, without explanation, Diana withdrew from the project, leaving Elton shocked and deeply hurt. What seemed like a firm commitment fell apart, and he was left with a feeling of confusion and intense sadness. Why would Diana abandon something so close to her heart? The answer, as Elton would later reveal, lay in Charles's concerns. According to him, Charles had expressed reservations about Diana's involvement in such a controversial project. The royal family was wary of any association that could be perceived as too political or provocative, and Charles, as the guardian of the monarchy's image, did not want Diana to appear too close to this cause. Under pressure from Charles, Diana made the painful decision to withdraw her support, leaving Elton devastated. This incident marked the beginning of a painful separation between them. It felt like a betrayal, not only of their friendship but also of the causes they both held dear. For Diana, it was yet another example of how the royal family controlled her life, depriving her of her freedom. The weight of royal expectations crushed her, and in the process, it broke the relationships that once brought her so much joy. In the months following the charity book controversy, the friendship between Diana and Elton entered what he would later call the deep freeze. Their frequent phone calls and meetings became rare, nearly disappearing, and the warmth that once defined their relationship seemed to vanish overnight. This period was incredibly painful for Elton. He saw Diana as much more than a princess. She was a true friend, flawed and deeply human, who had been there for him during his darkest times. Losing that connection suddenly felt like losing a part of himself. What made the situation even harder to bear was knowing that it wasn't entirely Diana's decision. Elton knew that Charles's influence had played a role, making the separation all the more painful. Diana, for her part, was also going through an emotional storm. The pressures of her public life, her conflicts with the royal family, and her growing sense of isolation weighed heavily on her. She began distancing herself from several close friends, not just Elton. It was as if the walls of Buckingham Palace were closing in on her, preventing her from escaping. But just when it seemed that their friendship was lost forever, a tragedy brought them back together in a way neither could have foreseen. In July 1997, the fashion world was shaken by the murder of Gianni Versace, a close friend of both Elton and Diana. His death was a senseless act of violence that shocked the world, but for Elton and Diana, it was a personal loss. Both had been close to Versace, and his passing brought them together after months of separation. In a strange twist of fate, Diana and Elton found themselves seated side by side at Versace's funeral in Milan. United in grief, the tension that had once defined their relationship seemed to dissolve in the face of such loss. Holding hands, they exchanged kind words, and, for For the first time in months, it felt as though they were truly reconnecting. For Elton, this moment was bittersweet. He was grateful to have Diana back in his life, but the circumstances were heartbreaking. They had lost a dear friend, and in many ways, their own friendship had been marred by the pressures of public life. But in this shared moment of mourning, it seemed that they could set all of that aside and focus on what truly mattered, their bond. Sadly, their reconciliation was short-lived. A few weeks later, Diana's life would be tragically cut short, leaving Elton to face the grief of losing not one but two close friends in such a short time. The world came to a standstill on August 31, 1997, when the chilling news of Princess Diana's death in a car accident in Paris was announced. The shock and sadness were immediate, and the global outpouring of grief was unprecedented. But for Elton John, the pain was deeply personal. He had only just reconnected with Diana after months of separation, and now she was gone. The weight of this loss was almost unbearable. He had always known that Diana was going through difficult times, but he had never imagined that her life would end so suddenly and tragically. As the world mourned, Elton had to face a difficult task, saying goodbye to his dear friend in a way that would honor her memory and the bond they shared. When he was invited to sing at Diana's funeral, Elton understood that this would be one of the most important moments of his life. He needed to pay tribute, not just for himself, but for the millions who grieved with him. What followed was one of the most iconic moments in modern history, the performance of a reworked version of his song Candle in the Wind, originally written for Marilyn Monroe, which became a poignant tribute to Diana. Singing Goodbye England's Rose, the world wept with him. It was a moment of collective mourning, and Elton's voice became the soundtrack of worldwide sorrow. Elton's performance at Diana's funeral was a moment of pure emotion, but behind the scenes, not everyone approved of the decision to let him sing, according to recent revelations. King Charles had initially been hesitant about allowing such a contemporary and emotionally charged performance for what was supposed to be a solemn royal occasion. Charles, once again concerned with maintaining the dignity and traditions of the monarchy, reportedly expressed reservations about the idea of Elton performing Candle in the Wind at the funeral. He feared that the performance might overshadow the more traditional aspects of the ceremony and draw too much attention to public emotion rather than the formal mourning of the royal family. It was only after the intervention of the Dean of Westminster, who understood the importance of allowing the public to grieve authentically, that the decision was made to let Elton perform. The Dean recognized that Diana's death had touched millions, and that her funeral needed to reflect that emotional connection. For Elton, knowing that Charles had been hesitant about his performance added another layer of complexity to an already emotionally charged day. He knew that his tribute to Diana was not just for her, but for all the people who had loved her. However, the tension between him and Charles was palpable, marking yet another moment of division between Elton and the royal family. Despite the tension between Elton and King Charles, Elton's relationship with the royal family endured, this time through Diana's youngest son, Prince Harry. From a young age, Harry had shared a special bond with Elton, and after Diana's death, this bond only grew stronger. As Harry grew up, he began to turn to Elton for advice and support. Elton, who had always admired Diana's warmth and compassion, saw these same qualities in Harry. He understood the immense pressure of being a royal and was determined to help Harry navigate these challenges, just as Diana had once done for him. Their relationship solidified when Elton performed several songs at Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding in 2018. This gesture went far beyond a simple performance. It symbolized the deep affection Elton had for Diana's children and his commitment to support them, even as their relationship with the rest of the royal family became more strained. However, as Harry's relationship with his father, King Charles, deteriorated, Elton once again found himself caught in the middle of a royal rift. In recent years, as Harry and Meghan Markle faced relentless media harassment, Elton became one of their most vocal defenders. He had witnessed firsthand how the media had hounded Diana, and he was determined not to let the same happen to her children. When Harry and Meghan were accused of environmental hypocrisy for using private jets, it was Elton who spoke out to clarify the situation. He revealed that he had provided the jets for their trip to his home in Nice and had ensured all necessary carbon offsets were made. In a passionate public statement, Elton defended the couple, condemning the unfair treatment they were receiving from the press. However, Elton's public defense of Harry and Meghan did not come without consequences. His support, especially in the face of royal pressures, deepened the rift between him and the rest of the royal family, particularly with King Charles. It was clear that Elton's loyalty lay with Harry and Meghan, and this stance marked, in many ways, the final break between him and the monarchy. For Elton, this decision wasn't just about defending his friends. It was about defending the values he shared with Diana. He had always admired Diana's courage to speak out against injustice, and now he was doing the same for her children. Reflecting on his decades-long relationship with Diana, one thing remains clear to Elton. Her legacy is more alive than ever, and in his view, King Charles never fully appreciated the depth of that legacy. In recent interviews, Elton has spoken openly about the role Charles played in Diana's life and ultimately in her death. He believes that Charles's obsession with maintaining the image of the royal family and his reluctance to embrace Diana's emotional and humanitarian side contributed to the challenges she faced, both publicly and privately. For Elton, Diana represented something far greater than the royal family. She was a symbol of compassion, empathy, and change. Her ability to connect with people on a human level, breaking down barriers of tradition and formality, made her a beloved figure. And though her life was tragically cut short, her influence continues to be felt worldwide. Elton's reflections on Diana's legacy are tinged with sadness and admiration. He mourns the loss of a friend who could have achieved so much, but he also celebrates the incredible impact she made in her lifetime. And though his relationship with King Charles remains strained, his commitment to honoring Diana's memory has never wavered. Ultimately, Elton's decision to break his silence about his relationship with Princess Diana and King Charles wasn't a mere sudden outburst. He knew his words would reopen old wounds and reignite public interest in a story already told 1,000 times. But this time was different. This time, Elton was telling the story from his own perspective, sharing details that had never been revealed before. In his final words, Elton expresses his deep sadness about how things unfolded between him and Diana and how the pressures of royal life and Charles's influence played a role in their estrangement. He reflects on the complex dynamics of the royal family, on the challenges it imposed on Diana, and on how these same pressures continue to affect her children. More than anything, Elton's decision to speak out demonstrates the lasting impact of Diana's life and legacy. He knows his words won't change the past, but by sharing the truth, he hopes to honor the memory of the woman he loved and admired. For Elton, breaking his silence was not just about telling his side of the story. It was about ensuring that Diana's legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew her and those who loved her from afar. As Elton steps into the next chapter of his life, his bond with Diana remains as strong as ever. And even though his relationship with the royal family may never be fully repaired, his love and respect for Diana will always be at the heart of his story. To conclude, the complex story between Elton John, Princess Diana, and the royal family highlights decades of emotion, tension, and loyalty. Over the years, Elton has not only honored Diana's memory but has also continued to uphold the values of compassion and justice that she embodied, even if it meant distancing himself from the monarchy. His unwavering support for Harry and Meghan, as well as his dedication to protecting their legacy, shows just how intact his friendship and respect for Diana remain, and that his love for her transcends royal conventions. In the end, Elton's act of breaking his silence is far more than just speaking out. It is a tribute to a woman who changed the monarchy and inspired millions. And even though the wounds of the past can never be fully healed, Elton reminds us that Diana's legacy endures, both in the hearts of those who knew her and in those who, from afar, continue to love and be inspired by her memory.